I cannot do anything better than the old masters did. When they ask me, do you still like the old masters? I say, I think they're wonderful. But my only justification is I do something different. You ask the old masters what they think of my things, it may be much more interesting.
Unique, provocative. Man Ray was an innovative American modernist. A photographer, a painter, an object maker, and an avant-garde filmmaker.
Look, they say that I'm ahead of the times, too. I said, no, I'm never, I'm of my time. It's the others who are behind the times.
He achieved fame with his portraits of the legendary icons of 1920s Paris. Igor Stravinsky, Gertrude Stein, Ernest Hemingway, and Pablo Picasso. He had love affairs with some of the most exotic women of his day, Kiki of Montparnasse and the elegant, talented Lee Miller. A man of amusing, ironic contradictions, he presented many faces to the world.
Hi, I'm Molly Barnes, your hostess for today. The subject is Man Ray, photographer, printmaker, artist, and my guest today is Mel Stuart, who in the old days, an old friend of mine, was known as a director of such great films as Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory. But recently, Mel has been making documentaries about artists, and what we're going to talk about today is Man Ray. Welcome.
Well, it's good to see you again, Molly.
Mel, how in the world did you pick Man Ray to do a film about?
Well, many years ago, when I was making lots of documentaries and other kind of films, I had an editor named Bill Cartwright. And Bill was one of these unique people that knew what was good in art. I am more a musician than I am in the art world. And he made me buy Liechtenstein prints and Andy Warhol prints and Oldenburg prints, and way before anybody was really onto it. And then the years went by, and about 30 years later, he called me and he said, I've just read a book by a man named Neil Baldwin about Man Ray, the artist. He says, I think it'd make a great documentary. So I read the book. It was very impressive. And the important thing about documentaries are, the casting is as important in a documentary as it is in a feature. Great features are made by good casting, great documentaries casting. Man Ray was perfectly cast. He had this whole vibration, all the vibrations were coming out of him just the right way for a film.
Mel, did you ever meet him?
I met him, I met him in a strange way. When I was a young man, my first job was as a film researcher for Walter Cronkite's program, 20th Century. And I got impatient doing film research. I said, I want to be a director. I want to direct an interview. And they said, well, we're going to do a film about Paris in the 20s. And this artist, Man Ray, is coming. You want to be a director? You can direct him. So my first job of directing was directing Man Ray, talking about Paris in the 20s. And I remembered it when I was doing the film, and I said, oh my God, there's an interview I did a long time ago at CBS, and I put it into the film. It was exquisite about, he was making a film, an avant-garde film for a seance, and the film was so weird and strange that a riot broke out in the theater, the police had to come, et cetera, et cetera. And when it was over, he was a very sweet, nice man. He said, come here, kid. He said, I'll sign a poster for you. So he gave me this poster.
You're kidding.
Over there, and he signed it at the bottom from Man Ray to Mel Stuart, 1958. So, and then I forgot about it, and then life went on, and then this movie came up, or the documentary, and I went to PBS in New York. I have a good friend there, Tammy Robinson, and she invited me to see American Masters, Susan Lacey, and they agreed to go and do the film. So we did the film. This is 30 years after all this happened.
Well, I knew you 30 years ago in my gallery when I was a very young girl, and now 30 years ago, here we are reconnected.
Right.
Now, the problem I always thought with Man Ray was that he wanted to be known as an artist rather than a photographer, but photography was so easy for him that despite, we all think about the lips, but other than that, we do think of him as a photographer and the maker of rayness.
No. Well, that's what made him nuts. He wanted to be known as a painter. But early in his life, in his career in Paris, he started taking pictures of other people's paintings, his painting, to make a living and to have a record of the paintings he made. In fact, there's a fabulous photograph when Marcel Proust died. Only one person was allowed in the room. That was Man Ray, this kid.
No.
1921 or 22, whatever it is. He took the death mask.
No. What made his
Proust.
photography so unusual? Why was he so hot when everybody else was secondary to him?
Well, I think he had a feeling for realism, of capturing the moment that people later on did. He sort of just got it off the cuff on one hand, and on the other hand, being a Dadaist and a Surrealist, he came up with the most strange types of compositions and really off-the-wall things. In fact, he then graduated eventually to fashion photography. People like Avant-Garde and so forth consider him the great master of fashion photography. But his great fame happened came about when he began to take a series of pictures of the most famous figures of Paris in the 20s. It must have been an incredible time to live, and he must have been a very attractive person because everybody who was anybody came to his studio to be photographed. And it's this series of photographs of very famous people that really started him as a photographer, and unfortunately he never got to be recognized as the painter he wanted to be, but he was good taking photographs. So maybe we can look at some of these here. You get an idea of the kind of people that would come to his studio and the way he would capture them in a way that those are the portraits that you always remember.
The point of knowing the people who interested me. They came to my studio. I invited them to sit for portraits. And the whole human being came out there and then, you see. Their awkwardness in front of me, I felt like a doctor, except that they came to me when they thought they were at their best, not sick. And I felt a certain power as a photographer then. And that's what fascinated me in photography especially, was the human face, the human reactions. Some would come and thought that they had to pose and look very impressive, like I photographed Schoenberg once. They brought him around when he's coming through Paris. And he came with a celluloid collar in those days, in the 20s, and a ready-made tie. And he sat in front of me very stiffly, like in an old 1900 photograph, you know. I took out a black silk scarf and I put it around him where his face was absolutely isolated. And the background, everything was black. I just got the face.
Man told me that when he worked and photographed his friends, he would only make 2 or 3 exposures, maybe 4 at the most. He wouldn't work the way photographers work today, rolling through 3, 4, 5 rolls of 35mm film. He would do it in just a couple of takes, crop right in the camera, right on the film.
Everybody who came into my studio was photographed automatically, like a photomaton for passports. When they opened the door, the camera clicked and they were photographed.
Hemingway with hat and bandage. The young writer had hit his head on Man Ray's water closet. James Joyce felt awkward in the studio. His eyes were weak, and he could not face the lights. This is the reluctant, revealing portrait.
I photographed Picasso in his dirty old raincoat, you know, which was the same color as his skin almost. Everything was tan, and it made him look like a bronze. Derain, the painter, used to send me his models to do nudes. He worked from the photographs. Because when he worked from the model directly, as one model came to pose for me, he said, he has a very peculiar way of painting. I don't stand in front of him. I sit on his lap, and he puts his arm around me and paints with his right hand. He seems he should have been a sculptor.
Unbelievable. Mel, do you think there has to be a synergism in the art world? For example, the Bloomsbury Group, the New York Abstract Expressionists. Do you think that you have to work with other artists in order to achieve success? I don't hear about artists working in Ivory Tower, particularly Man Ray.
Yeah, I would think he was lucky. He got to Paris in the 1920s, and anybody was congregated there. American writers coming from America, the French, everything was just flourishing. And if there was a time I would like to live in, it would be Paris in the 20s, provided I could get into that circle.
But he must have had an amazing personality. Did he grow up in Paris?
Yeah, no, he grew up in America. His father was an immigrant from Poland, and his name was originally Emanuel Renitsky.
No, no.
And he changed it to Man Ray, and it was, that's what he stayed the rest of his life. He really didn't care about his past very much. He tried to obliviate it. And, but in Paris, his French was never extraordinary, and even as American, I love when he says the word works, instead of that New York accent is still there. But he got along. The French sort of just thought he was just something special, and he must have been something special. In school, we sometimes write an essay, what I did during the summer. I went to camp or so forth.
Right.
His thing was, he went down to the south of France with Picasso to visit Matisse. Now that's something nice to do.
Fantastic.
And so he must have had an amazing personality, and I think it spread to women also. He wasn't the most attractive man in the world. Marcel Duchamp was attractive, but Man Ray must have had something on the ball, because he had affairs or married the most beautiful women in the world, and
it seemed like he changed partners every 7 years. There was sort of a serial monogamy, but it certainly changed. It was almost like clockwork.
He was married until he left for Paris in the 20s to a Belgian poet, a very beautiful girl, and then in Paris he had a long affair with the famous Kiki of Montparnasse, this wonderful, beautiful French woman who was the toast of Paris, but she stayed with Man Ray. That's the guy she wanted, and then finally they broke up. And then I think he had an affair with somebody, I personally think in all the work I've done, in all my documentaries, over 150 of them, the most beautiful woman I've ever seen photographed. And her name was Lee Miller, and he had this fantastic affair with her. And it's very hard in documentaries to show love, show an affair, because you don't believe it most of the time. You think, but I was very lucky with the footage that was available and the reminiscing and so forth, that I could create something that was as close as I felt I could ever get to showing what an affair was like. And we have a piece from the film, just give you an idea. It goes on for 4 more minutes, but I think you might like to see what Lee Miller looked.
They planned to spend the summer of 1929 in Biarritz. Then Lee Miller entered his life. Alluring and classically stylish, she had been a model for the famous photographer Edward Steichen. She graced the pages of fashion magazines and posed for the first advertisement for a woman's personal hygiene product. Determined to become a photographer and not simply remain a model, she sailed to Europe hoping to study with Man Ray.
Lee had heard about Man Ray in New York from people like Steichen, and she had his address, and so she went to his studio, and it was all closed up, and the concierge said, "You're too late, mademoiselle. Monsieur Man Ray has gone away to Biarritz for his summer holidays." And so Lee was absolutely distraught. So she went a little distance away to a cafe, and up through the floor, because there was this little narrow spiral staircase, came Man Ray. And she went over to him and introduced herself, and she said, "I'm your new student." And he said, "Well, that's too bad, I don't take students, and anyway, I'm just off to Biarritz for my holidays." And she said, "That's okay, I'm coming with you." And off she went, and that began 4 years of her being Man Ray's pupil and lover and closest friend and I think in a way his tormentor.
They were lovers, and at the same time, pupil and teacher, as Lee learned the art of photography under Man Ray's supervision. Their relationship was the most complex of Man Ray's life.
What a story. Now, who was that? The young, good-looking man. Was that her son that was telling the story?
Yeah, that was her son. Heard the story from her, and he filled in all the details. And what we do, we go on and tell the whole story of this affair. And for once, Man Ray had somebody as tough as he as he was.
Do you feel that she used him to learn how to be a photographer?
Well, everybody uses everybody in some way. But after a while, she began. It was the 20s in Paris, the late 20s into the 30s, and people had very free and open sexually and so forth, especially in that circle. She began to have affairs. He grew nuttier and nuttier about the whole thing and wanted her to marry him, and she wanted to go back to America. And
she never married him?
She never married him.
Did she marry?
She married Roland Penrose in England. That was her son, Penrose. And she left him, and he did a mock killing of himself. He had a picture made of a rope around his neck and a gun, but the gun had a cigarette in it.
True Dada story. That's fantastic.
A true Dada thing. And then he made his famous picture about the two lips, and those were Lee's lips. And there's his final homage to Lee. And then
I had always heard that Helena Rubinstein owned that painting. Not correct?
It's owned by a Greek magnate who's got a yacht and is on the shot in the harbor at Cannes.
I can't believe it. Now, one of the things that Robert Rauschenberg always talks about and uses this as a complaint, it was sold so cheaply in the beginning, and then when it sold for almost $1 million at auction, the artist didn't receive any money.
The artist never receives the money. Dorothea Tanning once told me, she said, you have to die first before you are famous. In a certain way, it's true with many artists, not with all of them, but Man Ray has become far more important and well-known since his death.
Well, now, I saw his show of rayograms at the at MoCA, the Museum of Contemporary Art in downtown Los Angeles, a couple of years. The rayograms surprised me. How were those done?
Well, the rayograms were done, it was his own, they called rayograms. After
got it,
yeah.
okay.
And now, everybody can do this.
Yeah.
So the whole world can make a rayogram.
Okay,
what you do is you have a piece of photographic paper, you put an object, any object you want, on top of the paper in the darkroom, flip the light on for one moment, take it off and develop the paper. And then you will see the image of, a negative image of what you put on the paper. Now, I had one made for me by Man Ray's niece, that Naomi Savage, who worked with Man Ray in his lab and learned how to make one. I'll show you what it looks like.
Is it sort of a predecessor to Xerox?
In a certain way. This is a slinky, and you see it. And this slinky was put on a piece of paper, and the light goes on and turned off. And this is a negative image of a slinky. Now, depending on the object that you put on, they can become very, very interesting pieces of photographic work that anybody can do. And Man Ray really perfected it. He would take flowers and put them in patterns, just get these negative images, and that was one of his contributions to the art of photography.
The Los Angeles dealer Robert Berman spent 2 or 3 years putting together a retrospective. It was here in Los Angeles, I think, a year ago, a retrospective of Man Ray's work. And I think he had hoped for bigger things, but it was an extraordinary exhibition.
No. Well, there was, for instance, he did pictures of his amour Kiki and a set called Blanche et Noir, or Blanc et Noir. My French isn't too good. But, and one of them sold for $750,000 at an auction at Christie's about 3 years ago. So they've gotten, with time, to get an original Man Ray is really something.
Did Man Ray live in New York as an adult, or did he live here in Los Angeles?
No, he moved to Paris in 1920 and then lived in Paris for until 1939, 40, 41, I think. And then when the Germans came into Paris, he knew he couldn't stay. So he got on a boat with, of all people, Salvador Dali, to leave it to Man Ray.
Was this before they were actually forced out?
No, they were still Americans, and Dali gets Spanish, so they were able to get out before war was declared. And he got here, and he didn't like New York because New York wasn't kind to his work. So he came out to California, and he got an apartment on Rossmore with his new girlfriend, Juliet. And
now, how did they meet? How did they meet? She was a dancer, wasn't
yeah,
she?
she was a dancer. They met at a party, and then they got together, and he did an exquisite group of photos of her. And they got together, and they're living out here. And one day, again, this is a world that you and I don't inhabit, Dorothea Tanning and Max Ernst, the painter, are coming through, and they tell Juliet and Man Ray, we're getting married today down at City Hall. And Juliet looks at him, and Man Ray says, all right, we'll get married too. So the four of them, Max Ernst and Man Ray and their wife, get married on this day. Then the war ends, and he really hasn't made it in California, and it's not a world he likes. He really loves Paris, so he went back to Paris, and he spent the rest of his days in an abandoned garage near the Luxembourg Gardens, and he built this whole weird world full of his statuary and everything else.
Mel, do you think it's always the woman that forces the man to marry?
What?
Do you think it's always the woman that forces the man to marry?
Why would you say
Well, I
that?
say that because Max Ernst wanted to get out of Europe, and Peggy Guggenheim got him to marry her in order to bring him to this country.
Well, that's a special thing. We've got Nazis involved, but I don't think all the time you need a Nazi to want to marry a woman.
And then she said that she had this Art of the Century gallery, and she was very happy with Max Ernst, and she said, let's have a woman show. And unfortunately, he went to make studio visits and fell in love with Dorothea Tanning.
Well, that's something to be learned from that. I don't know what, but anyway, she's a lovely woman, and I met her and I interviewed her for the show, and just wonderful.
Is she still beautiful?
Oh, she's still beautiful, and her paintings are wonderful, and she's really something.
What do you think is the most important thing we've learned from Max, from Man Ray? Yeah.
Well, I don't know. I think his contribution to the art of photography is his main contribution, a way of taking pictures, a way of taking Dadaist pictures and surrealistic pictures. And also, I learned from going over to Paris and meeting the people that knew him, because many people still do know him. A woman that owns the famous Violon de Langres, Rosalind Jacobs, New York, knew him, and she introduced me to Timothy Baum and all these other people that knew him. And so there's a whole coterie of people that still know him, and from them, and particularly from his relationship with, studying his relationship with Marcel Duchamp, there's a phlegmatic personality, there's an ease of living in life that I think made it easy for people to like him so much. And there's a little piece of film where he sort of sums up his attitude towards life that maybe it'd be interesting to hear him talk about what it was like at the end of his life and how he...
Because of a knee condition, as he grew older, Man Ray's world was confined to the small neighborhood around the Rue Ferrou.
I'm an old man now. In 60 years, you could do a lot of work. I did a lot of things in 60 years. My painting, my photography, my objects. I change all the time. I have periods when I do one thing, then for a few years I do something else. I'm a free man. I don't work for a patron, for a boss. I am indifferent to things that do not interest me, but never would I attack them, especially in the creative arts. Because I say anybody who does creative art is a sacred person. I don't care what he does, whether he paints academic pictures or is modern or different from anything else. He cannot do any harm. Whereas a bad politician, a bad doctor, or a bad cook can kill you.
That is so perfect. Mel, here's that man taking the picture. He should have taken some pictures of Man Ray.
Man Ray is looking at him, and he's explaining to Man Ray how to take a photo. I love it. But Man Ray would think that's very funny. And what interested me was his best friend, probably, was Marcel Duchamp. And the two of them used to play chess all the time and hang out together, and they both felt the same way about the world. You know, they weren't excited by being famous or anything like that, although both of them were, but they never took it seriously like a lot of artists do.
But wasn't Duchamp much more serious about life?
Yeah, well, in his theories about life, he was probably the most important thinker about art in the 20th century outside of maybe Picasso's work, but his idea of what art was non-art, and his famous opening, the Nude Descending a Staircase in 1913, led to experiments in which he tried to prove that if an artist signs a work, it's a work of art, but you may not think it's a work of art. Like his urinal, he submitted a urinal to the exhibit, I think in 1915, and they rejected it, but he said, I signed my name on it, so it's a work of art. And that question was taken up by Andy Warhol and Rauschenberg, and Andy Warhol's Brillo boxes come out of Marcel Duchamp's urinal. And I would like to do a film about him. That's the next film I'm trying to raise money to see if we can get some support from some organization.
If you were to cast Marcel Duchamp, who would it be? What leading actor? Paul Newman?
No. A little bit old right now. You would have to. There's one incident I love that there was a big exhibit for him in Pasadena, and he decided to play chess, which he became a chess player for about 20 years. He gave up art to play chess. But he plays chess, and if it was Marcel Duchamp, it's with a totally nude woman.
And, well, that was Eve Babbitt's. That was my
right,
friend, and that's one of the most famous photographs of all time.
So, entering this world, and now I want to continue by going on with Duchamp and getting money to do it, it was a fabulous voyage, but because Man Ray was a unique personality with a good wit and a way of looking at life that we have to envy. He was a true bohemian in one sense and a true artist in every other way, and I learned a great deal, and that's why I'm so happy I did that film.
Well, I hope to interview you in another 5 years, and Duchamp will be under your belt, and you'll be doing Jeff Koons.
Yeah, then we'll do Jeff Koons.
Thank you, Mel. This is really fun. I just loved the film, and I hope everybody will get a chance to see it.
Okay, thank you.
Art is not for everyone. It never has been. It never will be. But for those of you who love it like we do, we want to turn you on. I'm Molly Barnes.